Today I'm going to share some acrylic painting tips on this macaw and introduce you to my new studio assistant. On my recent home tour, I asked you guys what you thought I should paint for above my dog crates. Right now, I have today's video's painting hanging there, which is obviously way too small, but many of you had suggested painting my new greyhound, which I am definitely going to do. I love that idea, and I will tell you about my plan for that painting at the end of this video. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where you've got the real-time version of this lesson along with the reference photo available for you now. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my 1 to 2 hour, sometimes longer, lessons. I have a new one every single week. There are over 200 available for you to watch right now as soon as you sign up. If you're not sure if Patreon is a fit for you, I do have a link in the video description where you can look through my video library and see a free 2-hour colored pencil demonstration. Now, let's move on to this demonstration. For this one, I am working on a Fredrix round canvas, and these ones have a little bit more tooth than what I really like for getting this kind of detail in airbrushing, but I love the shape. So what I do with these, and just for transparency, I am sponsored by Fredrix, but they were already the only canvas I used before I was sponsored, so there was no real difference there, but just so you guys know. Anyway, moving on. So with this, what I do, and I really want a shape like this, but I want the canvas to have a different texture, I put a couple of coats of gesso, let it dry completely in between, and then use like a 250, is that even a number? 250, 300, somewhere around there, sandpaper, and lightly sand everything down so I get this nice smooth finish. Now when I come through an airbrush, everything is just so smooth and looks like I was using a canvas that started out perfectly smooth, which is ideally what you typically are going to want with an airbrush. So I went ahead and just got this super out of focus background on this. And one of the great things with airbrushing is if you are brand new, you just got an airbrush today, you don't really know how to use it yet, because it does take practice like anything else. This technique, getting an out of focus background, super easy. It's like one of the easiest things you can do with an airbrush. So even if you don't want to learn to use an airbrush for anything else, day one, you will be able to do that sort of a background with it, because that's the easiest thing to do with those is get something that looks fuzzy. Getting everything tight and clean details, that's a bit harder and takes more practice with airbrushing. But if you're just going for this out of focus look, super easy to do. Now, I don't like to draw directly onto my canvas because I do a lot of erasing. So I will draw everything onto another piece of paper, then use tracing paper to trace it, or sometimes I just trace the subject. You can go either way, whatever you're comfortable with. And then I use white transfer paper by Low Cornell and transfer the image onto the canvas. I will have a link to the supplies that I'm using in the video description. You can see I just go right over everything. You don't have to push very hard. And once I'm done with this, where I trace everything over, I've got all of those lines there without any eraser marks. My canvas stays nice and clean, which is a big deal. Now, if you are going to draw directly onto your canvas, I recommend using a white charcoal pencil. I like the one by Generals. That works really well, and that one will erase all of the way, but I do so much erasing, it's just easier for me to do the tracing and transfer paper method and not have smudges everywhere. You can clean it up with the white charcoal pencil, but this way for me, just easier. And the nice thing is, because I have that already drawn out on the tracing paper, if I start painting and I think, something seems off. Did I make the eye too big? Did I get a little crazy with the paint? I just take the previous drawing that's on the tracing paper, hold it up to my image, and I can see how close I am to my initial drawing. Because, I don't know, if you're like me, sometimes I get a little carried away with that paintbrush and things end up not shaped exactly the same. So I can sit there and figure it out by eyeballing it, obviously, on the canvas, but it's just a very, very quick way to double check if everything is still shaped the way you initially intended it to be. Now I'm going to start with the beak and tongue. Now, if you're doing something that is zoomed in like this, where it's a study, a close-up of the face, you're going to put a bit more work into it. It's very easily to look at a photo and go, okay, the beak is gray, and think, you just paint it gray. That's it. Just paint it gray. It's not. Look at the ridges that I'm going to put in here and how many layers that you really want to get. One of the challenges that people will often come to me with is that their work looks like a cartoon and they're having a hard time moving it beyond that. And usually that is happening, one, not getting the contrast correct, not getting your darks dark enough and your lights light enough. The other thing that can cause that is just not putting enough layers, painting things where you look at it and think, okay, the beak is gray, just paint it gray. But you're not getting the details in there. You're not getting anything else. And in this case, with the beak, there are a ton of details, a ton of ridges. Now, let's say I was painting a bird that is kind of off in the distance, out in the trees, a whole scene. Then I'm not going to put this kind of detail, most likely, if he's farther away. But when you're zoomed in like this, really get a good reference photo and really take some time to look at that reference photo and pay attention to all of the detail there. You want to try to include that. Now, the ridges in here do not have to be exact. The same thing when I get to the feathers. They don't have to be exact to the reference photo, but you still want to get that sort of detail. You want to create a similar texture. Pay attention to where the lights and darks go. Get those in generally the right area. Now, I typically will hype up the contrast a bit on my paintings from what the reference photo is. Not always, but usually I will make my darks a bit darker, my lights a bit lighter. It'll create a bit more depth and make the work look a bit more three-dimensional, assuming you've got your lights and darks in the right place. Another problem that people often run into is they feel like if they just knew what the correct color to use is, that is what is going to make their work look more realistic. The color has very little to do with it. I mean, it plays a role, but it's not as big of a deal as your values. I could paint this guy completely different colors. I could make him a red bird. You know, if he would just look like he had a red light cast on him. As long as my values were correct, he would still look fairly realistic. He would just look like he was under red lighting. If you can get your values right, dark's dark enough, light's light enough, and of course pay attention to the shading and the details and those sorts of things, that's what's going to push your work into looking more realistic. Choosing the right color, you don't need to know the exact color I'm using. As far as here, I mean, you look at that and you go, okay, it's blue. Well, which blue is it? I need to know. If I knew which blue you used, mine would look realistic. Not necessarily. That really doesn't play that big of a role. Pick a blue. I mean, once you get further along, you'll probably find yourself getting a bit more picky about which colors you choose. But when you're first starting, if you find yourself thinking, I just need to know which blue, which shade did you use? You know right there you're focusing on the wrong thing. Spend more time at that stage focusing on your values. Dark's dark enough, light's light enough, and I know everyone's probably sick of hearing me say that, but it's such a big deal. And it's something that so many of us, and especially me, when I first started painting, I would completely skip over that. I didn't understand that. I'm thinking, I painted my tiger orange, why doesn't he look realistic? Well, because I painted him flat orange and he looked like a cartoon. Pay attention to your reference photo. Pay attention to where are the lights, where are the darks, where are the transitions from one color to the next. These things make a really, really big deal, and that's what's going to push your work into that next level. If you spend too much time worrying about, I just need to know the right color, you're really going to have a hard time moving forward very quickly. It's going to take you a lot longer. Focus on your values. Here I'm using a liner brush, going through and getting some more details. Getting some of those sketchy lines. Now, I'm not super worried that my colors are exactly right. Well, obviously, as I just was saying, I'm not super worried about that no matter what, but I'm not really that worried that my colors are exact here. I want to get my values right. And if I want to adjust my colors, what I will do is a glaze where I tint the color. If what's underneath that glaze, if I've got the darks dark enough, lights light enough, oh my gosh, this could turn into a drinking game with how many times I have said that. But if you've got your darks dark enough, your lights light enough, you can tint the color. So let's say I wanted more of a brownish tone over the beak, which I don't, but I could if I did. I'm just going to take the brownish tone I want, thin it out with water, and glaze that right on top of what I just did. I can adjust the tint one way or another as long as I've got the values underneath it correct. So here's another big tip. I just painted the areas that need to be yellow. I painted them white first, and the reason for that is the yellows that I want to use are extremely translucent. If I just painted that on top of the blue or any other dark color, all I'm going to end up is kind of a greenish tinted yellow or blue. I'm not going to have yellow at all. If I want yellow to be nice and bright, I'm going to paint white first. The white, titanium white, is very opaque, so it's going to cover my blue very well. And then I put the yellow on top of it. Now my yellow is just that nice, bold, same color as the tube of paint, bright yellow. I let that dry, and then I come back on top of it. And usually when I dry things, I don't wait for it to dry. Normally I'll just use a hairdryer to speed things along. But now I'm going to come through with I believe I'm using a red oxide type color, kind of a reddish brown. A burnt sienna would work as well. And I've most likely tone that down with a bit of violet. So it's a little bit of a neutral color. It's not super bright here. And I'm just going to get some of the wrinkles in the skin. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, paying attention to those details. It's very easy to look at this and go, okay, that area of the skin, it's just yellow, just paint it yellow and that's it. Well, you can, but now you have a cartoon. Now it looks very flat. We want to create dimension. We want him to look more three-dimensional. And in order to do that, we've got to pay attention to this sort of detail. Lots of layers, and you're going to have some super ugly layers along the way. Don't let that discourage you or frustrate you. It's normal. I mean, this is not a super pretty stage here. This looks kind of terrible. Looks like I painted it with my feet, but it will get there. You just have to keep layering until it looks how you want. Don't give up until it looks the way that you want it to. As long as your base drawing is accurate, if you've got an accurate base drawing, just keep layering and working on the painting until it looks how you want. And usually, the more layers you do, the better it's going to look. It'll end up looking more realistic because each of these layers of paint are somewhat translucent. Some are way more opaque than others, but you do have a bit of transparency to them. So some of those will make, I'm making air quotes that you can't see, bad layers, they will actually lead to giving you the illusion of having detail. You didn't actually take the time, you weren't trying to create that kind of detail, but it sort of showed through. You may be looking at it right now going, this is terrible. You can see my previous bad layer. No, that's a good thing. Those little bits of detail, those little bits of kind of texture, and I mean visual texture, not texture that you would feel with your hands. When you touch my canvases, you rarely will feel texture. So that visual texture of that previous bad layer kind of showing through those transparent bits, it looks like you added extra detail when you really didn't. So we've got that highlight on his eye. Put another glaze there of the yellow. See how I just tinted the color because I had added all of the white for the highlights, let it dry, and then I did a glaze, so water mixed with my yellow to make it more translucent, and I glazed that over both the light and the dark areas of this skin here, this yellow bit. Using white to pull out a few more highlights, gonna dry that. Glazing again, so that transparent bit of yellow, and then I've got a bit of red oxide, that reddish kind of orange color, glazing that over that. Glazing that over that. There's some great grammar for you. See, I just keep going back and forth, get more detail in there. The other thing that you really want to pay attention to, look at your reference photo, which lines need to be sharp and crisp and which lines need to be soft and kind of fade into the next area. That is a really important thing to start paying attention to and will help your work to look more realistic. You don't want every line to be soft or every line to be really harsh. Look at your reference photo, or if you're painting from life, the same thing. What areas should fade out into the background? Or which areas should be super, super sharp. Here, some of these little wrinkles should be sharp and some of them need to be very soft. And I've just got to kind of pay attention to that reference photo to figure out which is which. Now, as I move onto the feathers, I'm going to use what we call a rake brush, and it's a type of brush where the bristles are separated a bit, and one brush stroke will give you the look of lots of little brush strokes, so you can save a bit of time. The thing you have to watch with the rake brush is you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to do everything with the rake brush. I will come back through with a liner brush or a round brush and separate some of these little clumps of feathers, because if I do everything with the same brush, it just looks too stiff, too man-made. That's not really what we want. You can also use it for getting blades of grass and that sort of thing. Fur, I do that a lot, but I want to create this texture just quickly. I'm just going to go through and block it in, but later on I'm going to better define these with another brush and take some time and put some individual details in there. But with this rake brush, as I work that through, I twist and turn it in different directions. I'm not making the same brush stroke again and again. That's another huge mistake people make when they use a rake brush. And I probably should do a video just about rake brushes and which ones I like and how to use them and all of that. I will do that in the near future. But here I'm twisting and turning it, and I'm really watching the reference photo. Which direction do the feathers go in? How long should each brush stroke be? How do they overlap? And that's a big thing. You want to make sure that these clumps and clusters of feathers do overlap. You don't want this to look like confetti where they're just randomly little lines all over the place. Watch the direction that these go in. Now I'm painting them white, and this guy is going, you've seen the finished painting, he's going to be blue, but I'm doing white first, and just like I did with the yellow, I'm going to glaze the blue I want right on top of it. But it makes everything very easy. I'm not sitting there trying to mix the perfect shade of blue or purple or whatever I need to use. I don't have to worry about that right now. All I have to worry about is getting the texture of the feathers going in the right direction, clumped the right way, shaped the right way, or at least close. That's all I have to worry about here. So it makes everything a lot easier than if I sat there trying to make every brush stroke the exact right color. Plus, when you glaze things, you end up adding more depth to the piece. Not really what you're seeing in the photograph or in the video, but when you look at it in person, the way that the light refracts through each layer, you build a lot more depth to the work when you do a lot of glazing. So it's not just that it makes everything easier for you. I think it actually makes everything look a lot better, at least when viewing it in person. Again, watch those reference photos. Look at how these feathers switch directions, and they're different types of feathers. They're the feathers on the top of his head right by his beak. They're different than the feathers on his body. Now there I had turned off the camera and didn't turn it back on because I'm a genius. But all I did was glaze the same thing I did with the yellow, my blue and purples into the feathers. Just thinned out my blue and purple with water and just brushed it over all of those white feathers. Super, super simple. And now look, you can still see all those little brush marks I made. Everything you're seeing there, that wasn't done with the blue and purple paint. That was done with white. Blue and purple just tinted the color on top. And I'll do a bit of glazing again, so you'll actually see that in the video in a moment. And I'm going through here with some transparent mixing white. I'm just going to lighten up. And transparent mixing white is, well, it's transparent versus titanium white, which is going to be very opaque. I don't want to completely cover up what I've painted here. So the transparent mixing white lets me lighten things up a bit without completely covering up the detail that I've already painted. The feathers on the wing are quite different in the way that those are shaped. Much more sleek. They're not poofed up on him there. And it's really easy as you're painting to look at that and go, okay, I painted one feather and it looks awesome. I'm just going to repeat this same thing then everywhere. No, don't do that. You've got completely different shapes and textures and types of feathers throughout the body. So you, again, look at that reference photo. And a lot of people, for some reason, when they get started with painting, they're kind of hesitant to use a reference photo. They think to be a good artist, you have to do it from your memory. The term photorealism comes from you're using a photo as reference. You're looking at a photo for that kind of detail as you paint. A photo is going to be involved. If you want your work to look good, you're gonna use either a photo or live. You can paint live from live models, still life, whatever you want to do, but you need something to look at. You're not gonna memorize this level of detail. It's just not going to happen. Sure, you can get to the point where you've painted 50 of this exact macaw and you can probably paint something and have it look fairly realistic without a photo, but that's way down the road. And even then, with me, I like flamingos. You guys know I have painted a million flamingos. I am still going to use a reference photo. If I want my work to look realistic, I need to use a reference photo. Do not feel like a reference photo somehow makes you not as good of an artist. That's ridiculous. That's something that people who are very new to art and don't really know what they're doing yet, those are the people who typically have that concept. See here, see how I'm just glazing? This is just a bit of purple on top of that blue that I had, or the white that I had added. Now I'm coming through with a darker blue and adding some shadows in between some of these sections of feathers, just better defining those a bit. And at these last stages, I usually will put my reference photo away because I already have the detail. Detail's there, I've seen what I need to see. Now I step back at the very end of the painting and decide what would make mine look better. Should I tone something down, make it a little brighter, hype up the contrast? That's the stage where I come through as an artist and try to make my work look as good as possible without needing it to be exact to the reference photo. So I know that sounds a little backwards because I was just talking about using a reference photo, but you do hit a point in your painting where you've gotten the information you need from that reference photo, and at the very end, and I mean very end, like the last hour painting, then I will go ahead and put my photo away and figure out, because the detail's there. If I need to see detail again, I'm gonna pull that reference photo back up. But otherwise, I'm just judging, maybe I need this area to be a little bit softer, this area a little bit more contrasty, whatever, just to make my painting look better, the best that I possibly can make it. Because you are an artist, so you are going to take some artistic liberties to hopefully make your work as good as you can. So there is my finished painting, and he is way too small for the wall that I currently have him hanging on, but I have plans. This is my new studio assistant, Gibson. Gibson is a retired race dog who is loving his new beds. Yes, beds plural. I have one for him in like every room now. Gibson's a hoarder. At first he just started collecting toys and putting all of his toys into his bed. He would go get them from one room and collect them into another. Now he's moved on to collecting my things. That green thing you see in the bed right there? Yeah, that's a placemat for my table that he decided needed to be in his bed. He doesn't ruin it. He doesn't do anything with it. He just collects them. My hair scrunchies, those have all been collected. I'm trying to think. My hand towels, wash rags, anything like that, those are his favorites. He collects them all and just puts them in his bed. I can't tell you why. For one of his first outings, we took him to Aqua Studios Aquariums in the Colony here in North Texas. Everyone loved him. He was super good. We have him, if you wonder what he's wearing there, he's got his harness, of course, just because that was attached to a seatbelt in the car, but he's wearing a belly band just in case he wanted to mark. So far, he's had perfect potty habits. He hasn't had any accidents inside, but I wanted to make sure he'd be welcome back to Aqua Studios, so we went with the belly band just in case. He got to watch some fish being fed. He was more interested in the food than the fish themselves. And because you can't go to Aqua Studios without coming home with something, I got a frag of some clove polyps, rainbow clove polyps, super pretty. He's clearly unimpressed. But they will be a part of the painting that I'm planning with him. So for that painting, it's going to be huge. I'm guessing either a 30 by 40 inch, maybe a little bit bigger. I haven't quite decided yet, but I'm going to go with a very, very large painting. He's going to be standing in a few inches of water, and I'm going to have coral growing up his legs. So it'll be kind of like what I did with the lion, where the coral was attached to the lion, only this time the coral's not a part of him. It's just kind of growing around him, or at least around the bottom of his feet and legs that are standing in water. I don't know if you can visualize that, but it is coming very, very soon. I cannot wait to get started on that painting. And it will definitely include the new rainbow clove polyps. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week. Well, lately they've not been every single week because the whole move and then the holidays. They're going to be every single week again, though.